So hello everyone. I have invited today Andreas Meyer, my friend, who's working for the International Business Aviation Council, and he is Director, International Civil Aviation Organization Liaison, to have a virtual coffee and discuss about the impact COVID-19 has on the aviation industry. Hi Andy, how are you today?
Good morning, Zorana. I'm excellent, and thank you for inviting me virtually to your living room for a coffee. I'm looking forward to our chat.
I'm looking forward to. Before we start, just to set a little bit the scene, as you probably know, in the last couple of months, aviation industry has been literally grounded. It is probably the worst crisis that we see since the 2008 financial crisis. Of course, it is not the first crisis generated by a virus. We had in 2003 the SARS and the swine flu in 2009. However, it is the first crisis that literally leads to a 90% drop in flight numbers, and also to registering huge losses, reaching 880 billions only for the airline industry. Now, the reason I have invited Andy here today is because his experience spans through many aviation domains, and he has exposure to both the private and public sector of the industry. Andy holds an air transport pilot license with over 9,000 hours of flight. As his educational background, I would like to mention that he holds a Master's of Science in Risk, Crisis, and Disaster Management and the Cybersecurity Certificate from Harvard University. Before joining IBAC, Andy held several positions, from which I would like to mention Managing Director for the International Federation of Airline Pilots Association. Then he joined ICAO as Safety Management Officer, and after that he has been appointed as Cybersecurity Officer. Now, before we start, Andy, with our discussion about COVID-19 impact, could you tell us a little bit about what and who IBAC is, objectives, scope, and maybe a little bit about the relationship with ICAO?
Sure. IBAC, as you said, stands for the International Business Aviation Council. It's a council that represents the business aviation sector, both the commercial side, the private side, and also the rotary sector of business aviation. It has memberships in all parts of the world. Through a membership association, we represent the operators at ICAO. Our main goal is certainly to facilitate the economic development of business aviation at the ICAO level, but also promote safety, security, sustainability, environmental aspects of our sector towards ICAO as a recognized international organization. We are an observer at the Air Navigation Commission at ICAO to input and advise our concerns and our concerns of our constituency towards the technical panel of ICAO. We are also represented at various panels of the council, of the ICAO Council, and contribute largely to sustainable aviation in terms of sustainable aviation fuel and environmental aspects. And of course, now we're also starting to get involved in the whole operations that ICAO is mounting to restart the aviation air transport sector after the COVID-19 shutdown.
So that's quite a huge plate that IBAC deals with. I was wondering, what is in your view, the impact that COVID-19 has on aviation industry, and if there's a different impact when we talk about business aviation or commercial aviation?
What could be said generally, certainly, Zorana, is we're all impacted in the same fashion. We see less movements and we see less traffic going around. Where we may be different from airlines is one of our advantages is that usually our clientele is, the party that you travel with. So we kind of offer a little bit of a comfort and a little bit of safety and security bubble where a passenger could feel comfortable, still continue to fly. So where we would probably have an advantage over airline transportation in that sector, we're certainly also impacted by immigration, strict immigration rules and public health and safety measures that are in place. But certainly we suffer like everybody else. We have a lot of airplanes grounded, and we have a lot of uncertainty on what can be done and what cannot be done for our operators that operate globally and worldwide.
As we know, usually aviation is proactive and predictive. And I was a little bit surprised to see that aviation is not ready for a pandemic like this one. Haven't we learned any lessons from the SARS? Is it because the SARS was more in the Asia Pacific region and we didn't pay attention, or we just didn't think that a pandemic could hit the aviation industry so bad?
I think it's the first time, almost the first time in history, where aviation is hit globally at this, almost at the same time. And it's unprecedented how it hit us. I was speaking to a medical professional last week. In his opinion, he said he was waiting his entire life for a pandemic to come, and finally it's here. So it shows you a bit how rare this event is. Where the air transport sector is certainly prepared is regionally isolated or maybe multi-regionally isolated events, but being faced with a global shutdown that happens at the same time, that is unprecedented. And certainly I don't think none of us in all not only in the aviation sector, but all aspects of life have been hit by that. So it's more the extent and the simultaneous timing that crippled a lot of industry sectors.
What about the business continuity plans and the recovery plans? Do they also take into account the economic crisis that we're going to jump after this pandemic?
That depends who you're listening to. I mean, I don't think there's a common consensus yet how and if that economic crisis is coming. I think lately there was a discussion about different steps that will be involved in the recovery measures to return to normal operations, RNA. First of all, you need to build the confidence of the traveling public that they can fly again. And meaning by that is you need to build confidence in that you have all the measures in place that protect them from being infected and infecting others. Once you have built that, you need to see if the financial means are still there for the people. Once they're willing to fly again, can they fly? Can they afford to fly?
We see two opinions here that once the pandemic is over, flying, it's not going to be that affordable, whereas some others consider that flying is going to be extremely cheap because the aviation would like to restart and it's not going to put the burden of extremely high prices on the passenger. What do you think? Do you think that it's going to be a luxury to travel, or are we going to see more or less the same type of prices and movement?
I think this question is probably better tiered towards IATA, who represents the airline industry. My constituency is based on the need for travel. A lot of our clients, a lot of our community is flying out of a necessity. It's not a leisure travel, it's a necessity travel to support business, trade, medevac, all these sorts of things. And then certainly you could also see the high-end net worth clientele that we represent that will still continue to fly. So I'm not sure if I could answer. I don't think it will have an impact on how our sector is pricing after the pandemic is over. We probably continue at the same level that we had before. Maybe it's going to be a bit cheaper because the fuel prices been dropping, but we'll have to see. But on the mass, on the traveling public, on the leisure travel, I'm not sure. I can't give you a prediction. All I will give you is my personal opinion, but that's probably wrong.
What are the recovery plans that the industry could envisage or is ready to apply apart from rebuilding the trust of the flying public?
I think we have different recovery levels. We have one at the operator level that each operator probably has in place and is pretty confident about them. But what we need to try and bring up with ICAO and other international organizations is how do we address the issue that we maybe have pilots and mechanics out there that ran out of their license validity during the shutdown. So how do we allow them to continue flying until the next possibility to renew their license, do a medical check? How can we continue maintaining the aircrafts technically? These are things that we need to address at the global level. And another thing that we're discussing and we're a bit concerned at the moment is how do we ensure the free movement, the facilitation of air crews and passengers. There's so many different regulations at the regional, at the national level in place. It's very hard for an operator to keep up in saying, what can I do, what can I not do? Can my aircraft stop there? Can my crew enter? Are accommodations available? These are the things that we need to address at the global level. So recovery measures are certainly tiered at building the trust, but they're also tiered at building a framework that allows for mutual acceptance of extensions of license, of exceptional operational measures. ICAO, to that end, as you probably know very well, has established a website where states can submit their ideas and differences and measures that they put in place to address the exemptions to license validities. But it's far from being complete. It's a little bit cumbersome to look at. So one of the first topics that we want to address with ICAO when they come back to the session next month, Council, is to build a repository of measures in place and to talk to the states in defining, can we find an acceptable level to accept different license validation, different license exemptions?
Don't you think that ICAO should maybe do a little bit more, but just this repository, and maybe come up with recommendations for states, and maybe not only recommendations, but more of guidance on how they should proceed at European level, for example? EASA is already issuing certain guidance, even for airports, for operators, on how they should restart operations, what measures there should be put in place, and also in relation to what you've mentioned, licenses.
Of course, it would be nice if this would be coming from international organizations, but I mean, you and I, we both know only too well, ICAO and other UN organizations, it's the states. The organization itself has very little that they can do. So if the states don't live up to their obligation and live up to the plate, then it's hard. So the appeal is to the states in council to find ways, council and commission, to find ways to share their experiences, to share their views on how recovery should be conducted, and then for ICAO to publish them. But the work, the willingness, the ability to find consensus, that is within the states. So the appeal is to the states, and ICAO, and to that end, other international organizations can only be the forum or provide the platform where the states can come together. So it's, you know, it's probably a bit unfair to look at ICAO and say, why are you not releasing guidance? The expertise is not within ICAO. The expertise is within the states. So the states need to share their experience and bring that to the table.
What do you think that we can call lessons learned from this experience so far?
Lessons learned, I think globalization has its limit. Other lessons learned are aspirational goals that are set on baselines, and I'm referring to environmental baseline, for example, just as an example. We need to be flexible. We need to be flexible enough to accommodate unforeseen disturbance to baseline results. So if I take Corsia, that was based on a predicted, or the prediction of Corsia is based on 2019-20 traffic volumes. That would be the baseline for future offsets. That would falsify the baseline now. So everybody would pay way too much in the future because 2020 would have been so little traffic. So we need to be flexible there. I think it also shows us that all the predictions that we were talking about over the last couple of years, and how many thousands of aircraft and how many thousands of pilots and other qualified personnel we need in the future, that data, I think we should build in more margin of errors when we start looking at predictions and not be too convinced about our mathematical models. We can't control it. And another lesson learned, I think, as hard as it sounds and as hard as it is to realize, is at the end of the day, it's back to each state for its own. We see that now. Yes, states are trying to collaborate, but it's the survival of each state. And yeah, you know, maybe UN organizations need to refocus on going back to the roots, why they were originally established. It was to build political consensus, access, not so much technical discussion. So maybe that's a lesson learned. Organizations like ICAO, the World Health Organization, it's more about bringing states together and talk about how can we work together, and leave the development of technical issues to the industry where the expertise resides.
Do you think that we're facing significant changes on the aviation scene in the upcoming future? Will we still look at the organizations as they are now? Are there going to be a shift? Is there going to be a shift more towards bilateral or multilateral arrangements or regional arrangements, or do we still think of going global?
I think the world as we knew has ceased to exist. Everything will be different. We might go back to traffic levels that we had before. But we may start relying more on, as you said, bilateral agreements. We maybe start looking at regional measures. But also, you know, you know this much better because you know Europe inside out. I think it showed how the concept of having a free trade, a free movement zone fell apart. Countries started closing borders. I think we had last week, we had a discussion in different views, and aviation will slowly restart. Really global international air travel, we're probably not going to see before end of 2021. We'll see first restart in the large countries, Canada, US, Australia, internally, because of necessity. Then we'll start seeing regional travel, and then slowly we're going to start seeing international travel again. Maybe refocus a bit on cargo. Cargo will become more important. I think another, what could be a result out of this is unmanned traffic. If we are able to move traffic without pilots, that's perfect. I mean, it's something that probably is going to be considered and being pushed harder than it was thought before, the whole unmanned traffic.
Well, I've heard you have a crystal ball. So do you think that in this crystal ball, you can tell us a little bit of how does aviation look like by the end of 2021?
I might have answered it a little bit before, but if I look in my crystal ball, cargo will become more important. We will see, certainly, I think, by the end of 2020, we're not back to the volume that we were for leisure travel, for many reasons. If the environment is allows traffic to start moving again internationally, I think our constituency will see an increase in traffic volumes because of the bubble that we can provide to the traveling public. We will be the first ones to fly again. I'm convinced of that because we can offer that level of trust. We can offer to serve you directly to where you need to go without transiting through huge airports. I think at the end of 21, the crystal ball, we're just going to reset aviation by 10 years. People forget. We had a lot of crises. We had 9/11, we had SARS, we had Malaysia 370, Malaysia 17, Iran flight, and everybody was uproar and everybody was panicked. Give it a couple of years and people will forget about it. It will be something in the history books. So will this be. So I'm a bit probably more optimistic than 1950, but 10, 15 years back, we'll see, probably going to be set back a bit. At the same time, it's going to be a push for innovation. Unmanned aircraft, the whole discussion, yes, we're going to have this. We're going to have a large push in biomedical research. So it's always a trade-off. My crystal ball's not that dark.
Well, it's good to hear that. So just to conclude a little bit, do you think we can say that at this point in time, we're quite optimistic? We're going back maybe 10, 15 years in terms of aviation development. However, it is a good opportunity for innovation. It is a good opportunity for growth. It is a good opportunity to reinstate those connections that we're actually missing today. Because as you said, the organizations are not very technical anymore, other than focusing on other strategic and political aspects. So maybe it's opportune to restructure the way we work and find solutions that would take us to even a better place in the near future.
Yeah, I think I think you can sum this up, and I like to revert to a saying that comes out of political science: never let a good crisis go to waste. So if we take this crisis as an opportunity, we'll get out of it with lessons learned, and it's going to be different. That's for sure, but it's always good sometimes to shake it up, as hard as this sounds. And we'll, I think it all depends on how fast can we recover, how fast are we allowed to start moving again, to start building connections, international connections again. And certainly if this drags on too long, only a few will survive economically. Going forward, it's always easier to manage what you know. You know what's going to hurt you, so you can prepare, you can maybe act earlier. It certainly has an impact, but I don't think it's going to be operational. It's not going to be as bad as this was, because I think a lot of the effect was because nobody thought it's coming. People woke up in disbelief and say, this is not happening. Now people had time to realize it is actually happening. Now you're going to know what's going to come, and certainly it's going to be nobody's hoping that it's going to come back, but I think it will come back. And if we live with that notion, and if we plan with the fact that it's going to be a cycle. We can prepare and we can address it because we will know how to cope with all these questions that we have right now. Hopefully we have answered them by now. Operationally, how are we going to deal with that?
Good to hear that we do have chances to recover and continue the activity. So thank you so much for being with me today for this virtual coffee and for sharing your thoughts and experience with us. And I hope to see you soon for another virtual coffee, and why not a face-to-face coffee? That would be nice.
I will look forward to that for the coffee. Thank you so much for having me, Joanna.
Thank you too. Bye.